Hey guys, we are here for the fourth and last installment in the Integumentary System video series, if you want to call it that. We are going to talk about today burns and cancer, two of the worst things that you might think about when you think about the skin, what they might suffer. We'll talk about first degree, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree burns. We'll talk about the severity of burns, and we use the rule of nines to talk about the severity of these different types of burns. We'll talk about three different skin cancer types seen here, their names, how common they are, why they're so deadly, which one's the worst one. We'll talk about synthesizing vitamin D and how your skin actually does that. So we've talked generally about it, but now we're going to get into some nitty-gritty details, and we'll connect some other organ systems to that process. And then we'll kind of recap the unit. So jumping in, I want you guys to think about, recall what we've learned with the different layers of the skin. And I want you guys to pause the video to guess, or to predict, I should say, which layers of the skin are involved in a first, second, third, and fourth degree burn. So go ahead and pause the video. What I would be expecting, you might say, is the epidermis would be a first degree burn. The papillary layer will be a second degree burn. The reticular layer would be a third degree burn, and the hypodermis would be a fourth degree burn. But it's not quite that simple. Third degree, so yes, it's true. Epidermis is first degree. The papillary layer is the second degree, and a third degree burn would be the reticular layer and/or the hypodermis. So it can include both. And so fourth degree is actually deeper than that. Fourth degree is actually going to be the muscle underneath the skin. So if you can get a burn bad enough, it's actually burning the muscle or the bone below the muscle. That would be considered a fourth degree burn. So it's pretty awful if you can imagine a burn that bad. Not necessarily a sunburn, that might be a chemical burn. That might be, again, burning on fire. So lots of different reasons for that burn. So this is kind of a summary of that spectrum of burn types. Okay, so how would a medical professional actually account for the severity of a burn, either first, second, or third? I'm not really going to talk about fourth too much because that's not super common, but that would be incredibly severe. So we use the rule of nines. This diagram here is actually easier to understand at first. So you can see in this diagram there's a whole bunch of 9%, some 4.5 if you total the arms on both sides, anteriorly and posteriorly, are 9%. Head, anterior, posterior, 9%. The perineum, kind of the genital region, is 1% to kind of total out the 100%. So the overall total is 100%. This diagram just totals the thoracic and abdominal regions, 18% front and back. So a medical professional will look at the severity of the burn and the percent of the body that is covered by that burn. So the most testable thing here would be this. So I'll definitely write this down. If you have over a quarter of your body, 25% of your body covered in a second degree burn, or over 10% covered in a third degree burn, or any third degree burn on these particular areas, head, hands, feet, genitals, major joints, you are considered a critical burn patient. Which is bizarre that if you have your body covered 5% in third degree, that's actually not critical, but 25% second degree, and many of us have experienced second degree burns if we go out in the sun without sunscreen. Anytime you basically peel, anytime you burn and peel, that is a second degree burn. That would be a general rule of thumb. You're burning into that papillary layer. So I guess to think real quick, why I think this part right here, that the 25% second degree, is the most befuddling thing to me. So why would you be a critical burn patient if only a quarter of your skin has a second degree burn, like you'd be out in the sun? So think about that for a second. Pause the video and maybe brainstorm a little bit. And I invite you to just think about that functions diagram. I think it's like table 4.1 in the textbook, about all the different functions of the integumentary system, all the different ways it protects your body. It maintains that boundary inside and out. And if you burn through your papillary layer, you're losing all of the entire epidermis and a small or large part of that papillary layer, and you're losing all of that function, including all of those cell types in that epidermis we were talking about. So if you think about this diagram, this is the most updated version of this diagram. I've kind of changed it a little bit to make it more precise. You are losing your Keratinocytes, you are losing the nociception at the stratum basale in your epidermis. You're losing the sweat. You're losing some of the sebum because those sebaceous glands are near that papillary layer. You're losing all of the melanocytes in that area, so you're losing all protection from UV damage. If you're into your dermis, you have no melanocytes, you have no melanin, so you're losing all of that protection there. So anything with keratin, melanin, um, some of these other protections against bacteria you're losing. So if I have very little protection against bacteria now, I'm losing my sweat and then I am incredibly susceptible to bacterial damage. If I'm losing my keratin, all of that toughness, all of that protection against chemicals, mechanical damage, I'm losing all of that protection. So you become a critical burn patient. You are at high risk of infection. You are at high risk of further damage to deeper tissues. So yeah, even a second-degree burn over a quarter of your body is a big deal. So that's one motivation for you to wear some sunscreen outside of cancer concerns, just health of your body. In class, we'll talk about burns and skin grafts. This is an article that we'll read again in class. Don't read that right now. But I do want you guys to think about, just a quick question is, why do you think little kids burn more easily than adults? What causes these burns most often? My pediatrician warns my wife and I about certain things about causing burns to kids. They're more likely to get burned by the sun and burned by things in the house or in the car. So you might think about that real quick, and again, we'll talk about that in class. Over the last video, I realized I really didn't have many messages in relation to these two pictures, so I thought I'd share that. These guys, I am incredibly good friends with my brother. My big brother lives in Ohio, but he and I don't really talk on the phone that much. He was out here this last summer, and it was like the good old days. We picked up where we left off. The conversations were great. I really do miss him quite a bit. All the guys I went to college with are in other parts of the country, and I've kind of not stayed in touch with them. I'm really bad about staying in touch with friends. My buddy Nate is in Boston right now. Was a biology major in college, and then didn't do anything with biology. Went into like learning Microsoft Excel and became an Excel whiz, and is working his way up the business chain. I'm pretty bad about keeping in touch with friends, actually. I don't know if you guys are this way, but as soon as I am not around someone, I usually don't stay in touch with them. I don't pursue them. I'd rather spend time with my family. I would much rather be a good husband, a good father, a good teacher, a good friend to those at my church here in town. So I'm good friends with several people in my church, but I lose touch with people and I don't pursue them. So I think that's something I look at myself and I say something I wish I had is the pursuit of friends, and I wouldn't stop pursuing them. But anyways, so lessons to be learned. Quick question. We're going to move on to cancer now. So this we just talked about burns, and now we're talking about the second half. We're talking about cancer. So this is a picture actually from a student I had last year. He had cancer in the back of his neck. Right here, he had it again, and actually had another section of his skin taken out last year. I don't have that picture. But this is the first section of skin totally removed because it was cancerous. How can removing skin save your life? So let's talk about skin cancer for a little bit. The sun is required for life. It synthesizes vitamin D, but the sun also gives you cancer because those photons sure go to town on your skin, that area exposed to the sun. So the three types of skin cancer that we're going to talk about in this video is basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma. I would pause the video and just kind of guess where in the layers of the skin these kinds of cancers will be found. I bet our talks about the layers of the skin will give away at the very least two of these. So go and pause the video and guess which layers of the skin are affected, which cell types. So if you're thinking this is in the stratum basale, you're right. If you're thinking this is having to do with melanocytes, you're right, and that's also in the stratum basale. Squamous cell is probably the most general name, and we'll talk about that in a second. So thinking about the layers of your skin again, going back to this membrane review of cutaneous membrane, your skin is made of the epidermis, dermis, and hypodermis. I can even include that as another tissue type, this adipose tissue. But of the two types we've talked about here, The epidermis is made of this stratified squamous. Dermis is made of this dense connective tissue made of collagen. The skin cancer is basically found exclusively in this stratified squamous epidermis. And I put three little stars to signify where those three cancer types we just talked about are found. Um, you have cells that have DNA, that the DNA itself can get mutated by the photons of the sun during DNA replication. So as DNA is splitting apart and copying itself and making two new strands of DNA, the photons of the sun can actually come in and affect and actually cause a mutation, and a wrong letter will be placed into the DNA strand. So either the A, C, T, or G will get placed incorrectly, and that will express itself in a different kind of protein being made, or a lack of function that used to work, it would be removed. So if cells reproduce consistently, but they know when to stop, skin cancer is basically a mutation that cuts the brakes on cell reproduction, on mitosis, and so this cell starts to grow out of control, grows into a big tumor, and skin cancer is just another type of that mutation, like kind of cancer. So again, this is just looking at the epidermis, these layers. The first type that we're going to talk about is basal cell carcinoma. It originates in these keratinocytes in the stratum basale. This is by far the most common. 8 out of 10 people, not like in America, but those who develop skin cancer, 8 out of 10 develop basal cell carcinoma. It is a baby cell, baby keratinocyte, and so you actually have quite a bit of time. It is slow growing. It doesn't metastasize. It doesn't spread throughout the body. That's a description of metastasizing until very late. And so there's a pretty darn good cure rate if you actually cut that out and remove it. So that's the first type, basal cell carcinoma. It looks like this. It is a dome-shaped nodule with a kind of a central ulcer. And again, that originates slowly. You can get that removed. Pretty good high success rate of having that be completely removed and you not dealing with it again. You don't have to memorize this or write this down. That's just a brief description. Okay, second type is squamous cell carcinoma, another keratinocyte, more in the stratum spinosum down here. Of all those who get skin cancer, it's almost 2, it's not quite 2, but almost 2 out of 10 develop squamous cell carcinoma. This is faster growing, this is higher up, so this is faster growing. It spreads more deeply to lymph nodes that are way down low, past even the reticular layer. It's more likely to spread deep, which once it gets to the lymph nodes, that's connected on a broad highway to the rest of the body, and that's when it gets really dangerous. It's not just that this kills you, it's that the mutated cells in your skin are spreading to the rest of your body and multiplying everywhere, so you have skin cells everywhere, and you don't want that. So only really early removal and radiation can develop a cure, but again, the success rate is pretty good. Wish I had more data on that. So this is what it looks like. It is a little scalier and a little more reddened with a kind of a darkened ulcer in the middle. A direct comparison of these two types is right here. So basal cell carcinoma versus squamous cell. Squamous cell is more common in the immunosuppressed patients, someone taking drugs that suppresses their immune system. So again, more likely to spread through your lymph nodes. Versus basal cell, which is slow growing, the most common type. So again, thankfully, the most common type is the safest, if you will. These are 3 pictures of squamous cell carcinomas. It doesn't just have to happen in your skin. It can happen in the sun-exposed skin. It can happen in this mucosa also, because they're stratified squamous in the mucosa inside your mouth. So this is a tumor inside your mouth, a carcinoma inside your mouth. This is also in the conjunctiva. So conjunctival squamous cell carcinoma is a tumor in your eye of that same kind of tissue, that squamous tissue. And this is probably the grossest picture by far. You've probably been squeamish, not squamous, but squeamish looking at this picture. This is actually a possible treatment for open wounds, is to let maggots eat and basically clean, sterilize a wound. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing, even though sometimes it can be, because diabetic patients who get amputated, who eventually have to get amputated limbs, their limbs can become necrotic and start to die, and so the babies of flies will start to actually eat out the necrotic tissue My wife has had several patients who've come to the hospital with necrotic tissue with maggots on them. They just waited way too long to come to the hospital. But this is an example of maybe even a treatment in the hospital. So they use it proactively also. Okay, last type, guys, is malignant melanoma. This originates in the melanocytes in the stratum basale. Only 0.5, again, the math doesn't quite add up because I ignored the decimals in the previous examples. So this is much more rare of all of those who actually get skin cancer. This is the fastest growing. It spreads even more deeply to lymph nodes. So this is really similar information as the last one, but this is the most dangerous. This spreads even faster. But once it gets to the lymph nodes again, it's the most deadly. So malignant melanoma is the worst type. This is what it looks like. And we actually have a rule to use on, actually before we get there, before I get to the ABCDE rule, I want to ask a question. Why doesn't cancer ever originate in the stratum corneum? So I want you guys to think, I'm not going to answer this right now. Again, I think as a teacher, I don't want you guys just to know answers for things. I want you guys to wrestle with stuff. So I encourage you to wrestle with and write down maybe one or two ideas of why we don't find cancer originating up here in the stratum corneum. I think that's a really important question. Again, that would be on a summative test to illustrate the nature of cancer, what actually is causing cancer. And if you can answer that, you can answer the whole thing. So we're going to talk about that next class. Okay, so the rule that is commonly used is the ABCD rule. Sometimes the E is added, and I've added it here. Also known as, you look at these cancers and you say, hey, is this mole, if you will, is this beginning of a tumor in some cases? Is it asymmetrical on both sides, or is it symmetrical? If it is asymmetrical, then it is more likely cancerous. If it has an irregular, blurry border, then it is more likely cancerous. If the coloration, if there's multiple colors, so more than one color, it is more likely cancerous. If the diameter is greater than 1/4 inch, so basically if this is a big sucker, more than 1/4 inch, then this is, again, more likely to be skin cancer. Evolution, this isn't like macroevolution, this is just the life of this tumor. Has this tumor changed and grown over the course of its life? Has it evolved and changed? So that is the ABCDE rule. Again, I would write that down with a very brief description of each one. If you guys can see that, again, I'll just rewind the video and listen to my description if you can't read this diagram. So I want you guys to look at these 6 pictures, and in class we'll talk about it. I'll make Obama's picture bigger because some of you watching on your phones probably can't see this very well. You could just type up any picture of Obama, though. So I want you guys to look at these 6 pictures and determine if they are yes, cancerous, or no, they are not cancerous, and if they are, why? So which rule of the ABCDE rule does it violate? So go ahead and pause the video, write each one down, and say yes or no, and then an explanation of why it is cancerous if you think it is. So which rule does it violate? So go ahead and pause the video here. Okay, we're almost done. I hope to finish this before 20 minutes. Your skin also synthesizes vitamin D, so it's required for life. So what is this thing? What is the synthesizing vitamin D? You can get vitamin D from food, from supplements, from green leafy foods, from fish oils. There's a couple different versions, D2 and D3, that you can get from foods that you can intake. That is processed in your liver. The other way to do it is actually the sun, when those sun photons hit, that actually can change this molecule right here, this pre-cholesterol molecule, into this almost usable vitamin D3. So this isn't quite usable by our bodies yet. And that goes to your liver also. Your liver processes it, sends it out, sends this chemical to your kidney processes it, and finally, after your kidney's done with it, you actually have usable vitamin D. So if I say your skin, your integumentary system, synthesizes vitamin D, that's kind of an incomplete picture. You actually have your integumentary system, and if you guys can recall which system this might be in, which one this might be in, saying that your liver is part of your digestive system would be spot on. Saying your kidney is part of your urinary system would be spot on. But again, it's interesting how many diverse functions these organs have. This isn't really like peeing this out. This is actually synthesizing and making this useful. So that's how vitamin D is synthesized into a usable form, finally. Okay, guys, we are officially done with this unit. We're gonna maybe add a little bit in class and review some stuff, but this diagram, I hope I've kind of edited this a lot and seen the big picture. This is the whole integumentary system. The integumentary system prevents and protects us from all sorts of damage. So it prevents a lot of damage. Mechanical damage, chemical damage, bacterial damage, UV damage. That's what this lesson was primarily about with cancer, was the kind of UV radiation can cause cancer. So the integumentary system prevents that kind of damage with melanin. It prevents thermal damage from hot or cold. It also prevents drying out damage, so it prevents desiccation. So all sorts of damage that we are protected from thanks to our integumentary system. Awesome. Again, I would know this diagram. For some of you, I would recommend to write this diagram out several times, word for word at first, and then summarized and changed up so you can flexibly understand what's going on here. For some of you, I'd recommend making note cards for this. Some of you, I would recommend studying with a partner and kind of verbally quizzing each other on this. So I think repeating it out, making note cards, and quizzing yourself, and verbally quizzing somebody else, I think are 3 great ways to study this stuff. And that's it. I'm done.